In Parak Chaf Bet of Sefer Breisheet, which we have learned exactly not even one pasuk, we'll start again from the beginning. And recall that last we learned, we were also looking at this story against the backdrop of the covenant that Avram Avinu makes together with Avimelech and Fichol, his chief of staff, his army chief of staff. And as far as the Rashbam was concerned, the events of the Akedah are against the backdrop of that covenant, and that maybe it was ill-advised as a choice that Avram Avinu made. It's for some maybe more challenging to appreciate that or accept that, and for others maybe it's a little simpler. We had ideas back and forth from various members of our shiur last we learned. So, Vayihi achar hadvarim ha'ele v'ha'elohim nisa et Avraham vayomer elav Avraham vayomer hineni. If you look at other places in the Torah where Hashem spoke to Avram Avinu, he did not call his name, and then Avram said, "Here I am," and then Hashem told him what he wanted. So there is something here about the very fact that it's almost like the way that the Torah underlines, as some of the Mefarshim point out, something big is about to happen. Ergo, God called his name, and then he answered. Yeah, and there's something here about the sort of the interplay of the dialogue, that it's more, again, my colloquial language would be the film speed is slowed down, like highlighted on this, zoomed in, watch this. And it's not because it didn't happen other times. Some of the Mefarshim actually say that from here, we learn that this is like what's called a binyan av. This is the example that sort of proves the rest of the times that this happened, i.e., every time Hashem spoke to him, he would always open with Avram's name, he would call him, and then Avram would respond, Hineni, and then Hashem would speak to him about whatever it was that he was going to say. That's the idea, let's say, of the various Mefarshim that point this out. You have this in Midrash Chayfetz is one of the examples where this appears. I have it here in a compendium that I like to use called the Otzer Mefarshei HaTorah. Hashem is talking to Avram Avinu, it seems, the Rambam would maintain, and others, it's a dream. It's a prophetic dream. Maybe this is the way Hashem spoke to him always. So he came to the middle of the night, he told him this, and the next morning, therefore it's going to say he got up in the morning and he went. Others, the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, the idea that whenever this happened, it didn't have to be at night, but whenever it was, Avram Avinu waited till the next morning. There wasn't enough time to get ready and to go, so he waited for the next morning until he went. But Hashem spoke to him here. The very fact that he answered Hineni, Rashi right away gives you the beautiful framing, Kachi aniyatam sheltz chasidim, the pious ones, that's how they answer, here I am, I'm ready, I'm at the waiting, whatever it is. And Lashon Anavahu, it's the language of humility, Lashon Zimunhu, the language of preparedness, ready. And then Hashem gives him the actual command. But just the idea that there's something big that's in the offing, that Hashem wants to get Avram's attention, if you will, say, called his name. And some of them are no, that's happened every time that way. Yeah. For the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, there's something big that's going to happen. So therefore, he called his name to get his attention first. We have another parallel example of this, the beginning of Sefer Vayikra, where it says that God called to Moshe, Vayikra el Moshe, Vayomer Elav. So what if he called him and he said to him? Why in two steps? The idea that Hashem sort of, before Hashem would ever speak to Moshe Rabbeinu, would always say Moshe. He would call his name, and then he had his attention, and then he would tell him. We learned from this an idea that before you start speaking to someone, you should open with a greeting, call their name, etc., as a form of etiquette in relating to them. Now we come to the next piece. There's always more to say, but I'm trying to go in a linear fashion before we analyze all the ideas. Why a test? What's the function of a test? Why is this happening? We've all of us, I'm sure on this call, we've dealt with this question over the years. We'll come back to it. And some of the Farshim already treated in Pasuk Aleph. But let's try to see a little bit further. We'll get to Pasuk Bet today. Vayomer kachna et bincha et yichidcha asher ahavta et Yitzchak v'lech lecha al eretz haMoriah v'aleu sham leolah al achad heharim asher omar elecha. In one pasuk, We have the command or request. Because if you look carefully, Hashem says, please. Is he saying please because it's a big ask? It's a possibility. Is it kachna, please, because so much hinges on this in terms of cementing the notion that a Kadosh Baruch Hu's relationship with Avram Avinu is reciprocated, that Hashem could ask Avram Avinu anything, and Avram Avinu will do it for him? Is it just, again, part of the same idea of etiquette? Hashem said, remember, I love Avraham, and therefore now the response is the next piece is, please, as a nice way of speaking, but it's still a commandment. It's not entirely clear. Now, if you look at the at some of the Mefarshim have the word na, nun aleph, not actually as please. Unkelus and others, they see it as now. Kach na et bincha. Take your son, etc., etc. Right now. Do it now. Don't do it in 10 years. Don't do it later. Do it at this specific time. And indeed, there are Mefarshim who read it as a reference to today. Unkelus, right here on the page. Va'amar divar ke'an yat berach yat yechidach di rechamt yat yitzchak, etc., etc. So ke'an. Now, I'm telling you to do it right this minute. That's a very different way of approaching it than the way Rashi sees it. But what would it mean that Hashem said right now? Right now, in response to what you just did in the last perek, the covenant, right now, like in the immediacy of the moment, it's not clear. It's clear, though, that Hashem's telling him to go to a certain place. And as we know, it's going to be a 3 days journey. And that's deliberate, sort of it's not a rush, if you will, but it's with a forethought and consideration that Avram still goes ahead with it. Yeah. The Abarbanel, probably based on Unkelus, I didn't say exactly side, says, now that everything is lined up, now that you've come into your own, now that we have a covenant, now that you've done the Brit Milah, now that you have a son, now that all these things are ready, now here's the commandment. In other words, it's building on what happened previously. Karen, go ahead.
Could the now also be, we saw with Saddam that Avraham responded and argued and negotiated. Could the now here be, do it? Don't do that negotiation, because we find that in fact Abraham is not going to do a negotiation.
Not doing a negotiation, which is a big mystery.
But maybe that now is do it now. You're like you would say to a child, don't argue with me, do it now.
Could be.
Just a thought.
Could be. And interestingly, and there's a question. I mean, there's always that question, which I know many of us have, which hopefully we'll get to and more on the philosophical side. Now we're doing more of the exegetical, which is why didn't Avraham say, well, what if he's righteous or whatever? He didn't see it as a punishment. He saw it as something else, not as a punishment. But the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, it was clear that it was going to be a punishment. Yeah, Hashem told him the people are sinful. Hashem told him why they're going to be punished. And it could be that's do it now, and there's no discussion. It could be. I will point out the word nun aleph. If you want to see another example, now that you mentioned Sodom, while you hold your finger on chapter 22, go back to chapter 18, verse 21. 28 again, chapter 18, Parashat Yudchat, Pasuk Chaf Aleph, and look there at what Hashem describes about what he's planning to do with regard to Sodom before he destroys them. You see it right there? Erda na ve'ereh haketzakata ba'ilai asukala ve'imlo eda'a. I'm going to go down. Na is not now, please. The word na means right now, in the immediacy. If you want an example that you know very, very well, and it is a bit of a, in my view, it feels to me, which doesn't necessarily mean that's a fair statement, but it feels to me like it's a double entendre, what you would call, and right, I call it a double entendre, but that's for reasons of my birth and my native land. But Ana Hashem Hoshia Na. You know from Hallel? Ana Hashem Hoshia Na it really should be translated as, please God, save now. Ana Hashem Hoshia Na. Sometimes people read it. I think it's more homiletical. Ana Hashem Hoshia Na. Please God, save, please. Like I'm begging you. Like this is my entreaty. The word Na, Nun Aleph, reflects an idea in these contexts. Perek Yud Chet Pasuk Yud Aleph, Perek Chav Bet Pasuk Bet. The word Na in the Pshat is not please. It actually reflects the idea of right now. Rashi knew this. Rashi was obviously aware of this. Rashi had Onkelus's commentary before him. And remember, I try to remind myself when I'm learning, Rashi did not have one important commentary. He didn't have Rashi. He had to figure it out. And for Rashi, the idea here, and he based himself on Chazal. He didn't make it up. But Rashi pulls out of Chazal a homiletic understanding, because the homiletic understanding teaches us something about how much was hanging in the balance at this moment of this particular mitzvah. Maybe in a certain way, more so than Lech Lecha. And more so maybe even than Brit Milah. And that is, would Avram Avinu do this? So Rashi, right here, very trenchant in his language, quoting from the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Ein na elo lashon bakasha. The word na here means please. I entreat you. I request of you. Amalo bevakasha mimcha. I'm asking you, amodli bezo hanisayon. Please, Avraham, withstand this test. Pass this test. Shelo yomra rishonot lo haya behen mamash. Because this is, according to many of the Rishonim, the ultimate test. It's number 10. And if this one doesn't work, if you fail this one, then all the other previous ones, there's a cumulative impact that will have been somehow, I don't want to say negated, but in some way there'll be a strike against it in terms of its efficacy or the signal to the world that this is the person that Hashem made a covenant with. Because look at that, he failed the big test. Yeah.
In Natan Hanavi's critique to David, he says, you got a lot of lambs. Why do you have to take this poor man's one lamb? And so Hashem, what is the reason to affirm the faithfulness of Abraham? He wants to take his one lamb. Has anybody discussed that?
Yes. Many people have discussed this question. That was what I was alluding to at the beginning of this shir this morning in pointing out that we will, God willing, have the discussion about why this test. Why would Hashem ask this? What is the point of it? And we may be left more with questions than we will find answers. And I acknowledge and I agree, I'm sure everyone will agree with me too, that this is a question we've all wrestled with. It's not the first time we ever saw the Akedah. We just heard it read in Shul a few weeks ago, Parshat Vayera, a few months ago. And of course, we heard it on Rosh Hashanah every year. And we're always left with these questions. But what I'm trying to do right now, Helen, is to focus first just on the exegetical, to look at the words. What do the words mean? What do we tease out of the words themselves? And if, of course, our question, I think, is Avram Avinu's question. So I want us to sit more with the question by going through, what does Avram hear from Hashem? Kach na et bincha. So the first words, kach na, was he telling him right now, as Karen pointed out, now, no questions, now, let's go. This is what I'm saying. And don't start with the negotiation like you did with Sodom. It's not the same thing. There, by the way, I'm telling you, there in the preamble of that story, the negotiation, God said to Avraham, they're guilty. They're terrible people. They're sinful. They're wretched, and they deserve to be punished. Here, There's no explanation about why. It's just kach na et bincha. And for Onkelos, it's right now. But for Rashi, based on the Gemara and Sanhedrin, it's I'm giving this a mitzvah, but it's also a requested mitzvah because Avram, you should realize how much hangs in the balance if you pass this test. And Avram is obviously thinking as we're thinking at this moment. But if the test goes through and I do what you ask me, then it's negated all the other promises you gave me. In which case, how do we reconcile those two things? Yeah. Okay, Karen, go ahead.
I was going to say that I think, as often happens in Torah, it doesn't have to be an either or. It can be both. That's the subtlety of it.
Yeah.
One more argument in favor of including, not to the exclusion of the please, but including the now, is that we don't see during those 3 days that Avraham is disputing the request either. He just accepts it the way, this is it, Dad has spoken, take out the trash. There's just no
Doing it.
Do it. And we can't hear the intonations. We're reading, but I assume that when a Navi gets Nevuah, that there's something above and beyond just the words that are being transmitted.
Above and beyond and below and all around. Oh, for sure.
From everyone. And we can't see that. We just are reading.
Right. Now, since you opened the door to this, I'll mention this now. Faith, I see your hands. Give me half a sec more. We will, not today, but we will open the Medrash, where the Baalei Medrash will unpack for us, explain to us sort of the process of that 3 days through various stories. Some of us know these stories, vignettes, and we'll have to ask ourselves, okay, why isn't this in the Torah Shebichtav? Why isn't it in the Sefer Torah? Which is itself a discussion about how to learn. When you're learning what's on the surface, but the surface is only the surface. It's really the tip of the iceberg, and there's much, much, much depth. And we're going to learn those stories inside about some of the internal process of Avram Avinu and of Yitzchak Avinu as they're walking on these 3 days. If you look in the Torah Shebichtav, the written Torah, it's silence. And we're left to think, okay, what's the, right now, just looking at these two words, kachna, what's Avram Avinu's thought process? Please, or like right now, or both. And it's not a contradiction necessarily. In Rashi's iteration, that it's bakasha, the Hashem is prepping Avram Avinu because it's going to be a very harsh, very strenuous, a very challenging request, and more than a request, a command. But it's couched with please because, if you will, from God's plan, perspective of God's plan, this has to go through. It can't fail because it is, if you think about it, sort of as a construct, this is the that which cinches everything that's come before.
But Avraham, we know because we're reading it, so we know it's the final test. Did Avraham know? Did Avraham didn't know this? Did he keep, maybe in his mind, it's like, well, this keeps ratcheting up. Is there ever going to be an end to the test?
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. Faith, please go ahead. Just unmute yourself. Yeah, go ahead.
My question is that why does Rashi say it in these words? He says there's no other meaning to na except request. Why doesn't he say there are two meanings, but I prefer this one? Or why doesn't he just say this is the meaning?
I think that the idea here is the fact that it's couched in a certain language that in and of itself it seems to be hedging. In other words, V'yomer Shem al Avram, Lecha me'aretz chamiladchem beit avicha l'Yisrael. That's just it. There's no, could you please do this? God's the commander, the human being's the commandee, if you will, and this is what you should do. Let's do it. So it's not. There's no ifs, ands, or buts, etc. And there's no. It's not that Hashem's not polite, so to speak. It's that's not what a command is. It's not an if you please. So the idea that here the language is hedging, when we know it's a very serious mitzvah, was this, would you like to do this? Yeah. It is in and of itself a big question. about how we're going to navigate as readers. The idea that here, of all things, Hashem gave us what's the word? There's like a hedge. Like, oh, maybe. There's no maybe. So ein na, the invocation of the word na in this context, by the way, it's not Rashi, it's Chazal, cannot be simply to teach us that he wants to do it right now. It must be that it's some kind of a request. Rashi, by the way, didn't make up this language. I'm putting it on the screen. It's exactly the language of Chazal. Right here. Where are we here? Vaylokim nisaid Avram, vayomer kach na et bincha amar b'Shimon bar Abba, ein na elo lashon bakasha. Yeah. Then not quoted in Rashi. Mashal lemelech basar v'adam, a corporeal king. She'amdu alav milchamot. Where am I? She'amdu alav milchama chazak. She'amdu alav milchamot harbei. He had many, many wars that transpired. V'haylo gibor echad. There was one particular mighty warrior, V'nitzchan. He was successful, meaning he vanquished the enemies. And then what happened? Liamim, after some period of time, Amdalav milchama chazaka, a very great war arrived. Amarlo, the king, said to his main general, his main soldier, his main warrior, B'vakasha mimcha amod milchamazu, shelo yomru rishonot ein behem mamash, so that they will not reflect retroactively on the earlier wars and say, look, you didn't survive this war. Clearly, there's something about the previous wars. Well, he wasn't really all that great. It will mar the picture. So Amar Fakadosh Baruch Hu Amar LaAvraham, Nisiti Bekama Nisyonot V'Amarata Bekulan. I test you in different tests. You withstood them all. You passed them all. Achshav, now. Na. Achshav. Na. Now. Interesting. Amodli b'nisayon zeh shlo yomru ein mamash b'rishonim. So they won't afterwards turn back and undermine the previous tests. What's amazing is that mashal uses the word na and now this one really matters. That's right. But how does Rabbi Shimon bar Abba say it? He says that actually the way Hashem said to him is, please don't fail this one. If you look carefully at that Gemara, it's actually to Karen's point from before. There's in the please, it's please now. Follow? But the idea that Hashem used the language in the tzivui, in the mitzvah of na, implies there's something else that's in the, that's sort of, I don't know what to say, hanging in the balance that needs to be, it needs to happen. It needs to happen. I don't know how many of you are using a chumash that's like it has the 5 books of the Torah in it. But if you have one of those, if you open up in the Tanakh and Sefer Shmot, and you turn to chapter 11, verse 2, you'll find something there, right? And you'll have the same kind of idea that also the word na is invoked, right? And just for want of time, if it's easier for you, if you don't have a full Tanakh, I put it on the screen. That's right in front of you. You should see that now. Yeah. God says to Moshe, I'm going to bring one more plague on Paro and on the Egyptians. Then he'll send you. That'll be complete. You know, he'll throw you out. You'll be out. What you do in the meantime? Daber na be'oznei ha'am. Vishalu ish meid re'eo v'isha meid ru'uta klei v'klei. Tell people to borrow each man from his neighbor and each woman from hers objects of silver and gold. And every translation, of course, is an interpretation. You know what the English translation did with the word na? It ignored it. It's like it doesn't exist. Rashi, I don't know. You can't even get Rashi in Hebrew on Sfaria. I don't know what's going on over there, but here it is in English. It's kind of funny, right? Can't even get it in Hebrew. No. Okay. Daber na, translation of Rashi into English, quoted from the Gemara, Masechet Brachot. The word na is always an expression of entreaty. In Hebrew, bakasha, like we saw in ours. Here it means, I entreat you. Admonish them about this which follows, impress this injunction upon them, so that righteous man Avraham may not say the prophecy, they shall serve them and they shall afflict them he permitted to be fulfilled in them, but the promise, and afterwards they shall go forth with great substance, meaning with, he did not bring to fulfillment for them. Remember when Hashem promised to Avram Avinu they'll be strangers in the land that is not theirs? And then when they leave, they're going to go, to have great wealth. Well, I'm going to make it so that they're thrown out. Close this. I'm going to make it so that they will be thrown out. I'll make it so that, the promise that I gave Avram will be fulfilled. But this is on them to do. Otherwise, it's going to be a big problem. And I'm asking, please, this they have to do. This has to be from them, which is, please, that they should go and ask the Egyptians for their wealth. As if they don't, it's going to be a problem. What's the problem? Back in the beginning, what I told Avram Avinu, it will not have been fulfilled properly. Now plug it in right here. Vayomer, kach na et bincha. Avraham, I'm giving you this mitzvah, but please, this is the one I'm saying. Don't fail this one. Not that you would fail. And I have confidence in you that you will pass. But this one has a lot hanging in the balance because it reflects back on everything that's happened before. So in our first part of our shir, we have basically focused on one word, the word na. Now let's, for the remaining few minutes over here, talk about the rest of the pasuk. Oh, Debbie, please go ahead.
I just want, when Karen said we don't hear the intonations, which I totally agree with, bringing it so that we really get it, how many times do we read a text and our interpretation is not what the sender of that text really meant? Because again, we don't hear one word that we're focusing on becomes critical in terms of the real meaning when we're only looking at the words, kind of like texting as opposed to talking to the person in contemporary times. And that's why everything that we do with studying the interpretations and all of that is so critical. Like what you just did with the one word now.
Okay, well, it's not me. It's Onkelos
Exactly.
versus Rashi, But exactly. I want to just mention one thing of what you're saying, Debbie, and this is interesting because I have some, not too much, but some experience, let's say studying English literature. Yeah, it's my undergraduate studies. So by no means an expert. So maybe somewhat dilettantish, even still, a bit of a novice, but with a little bit of exposure. And here's a place where there's a departure between the way people read literature today and how we read Tanakh, which is that on a certain level today, I'm oversimplifying critical theory, et cetera, right? They start to say today, they'll say things like, it doesn't matter what the author intended. It doesn't matter what they said or what they meant. It just matters what we think today, how we read it through our lens, our prism. And here I want to sort of just modulate a little bit of what you said. I'm sure that this is what you're saying. Like there is an idea in Tanakh specifically that actually there's more of a balance in that. We do care what Hashem intended. We cannot just get up and make up whatever we would like and reinterpret a pasuk because it feels different to us now, in our experience. Within Torah, we say there's Shivim Panim LaTorah, 70 facets, but that we also say in the same breath practically, we have to be careful not to be megale panim b'Torah shelo k'halacha, not to reveal facets within the Torah that do not follow the halacha, right?
Yes.
So where's the balance? So we look, okay, wait a second. Even Rashi. I have this conversation with my kids. The kids when they're in third grade, they have the Rashi play. Rashi, the greatest commentator, the greatest everything. So I don't want to undermine their feeling that Rashi is the greatest commentator. He is the greatest commentator. He is. And there's a picture of Rashi. There's a picture. There's whoever it's really a picture of. I don't know. It's a picture. It's like a painting. So, but I tell them, but Rashi was also once in third grade. Rashi also one time looked in the Chumash and said, I don't know. So I asked him, how did Rashi become Rashi? So then I start, well, I don't know. Well, he just knew everything. He just knew everything? Was he a Navi? No. Well, how did he know it? So, oh, he had Rebbeim. Oh, he also went to school. Really? Yeah, he went to school in France, where he grew up. Then he went to yeshivas in Germany, in a funny sounding town called Worms. Yeah, I think one of the kids remember asking, are there a lot of worms in Worms? Maybe, right? He got a base madrash. He learned there. By the way, he had notebooks. Then one of his main notebooks became the commentary on the Talmud, called the Kuntras, in English, the notebook, the manuscript. That's what it was. And Rashi is quoting almost all, not all the time, but almost all the time from this vast ocean, an ocean of Torah called Chazal. But what he chooses to put in and how he writes it, that's the greatness.
Exactly.
And the point is, when you deal with, let's say, lahavdil fe'avdalit, literature today, critical theory, when I say today, I mean the last number of decades, it is to analyze text. And we don't care about the author of the text, the intention of the author, the setting of the author. None of that matters. All that matters is, what do we see in our contemporary moment? It's almost, in my view, it's almost like a narcissistic read of things like, well, what does it mean to me? And of course we want to have meaning, but the point is, there's meaning that's meaningful to me, but it's still within a framework and a context of, what did the original author of the Sefer Torah, what do you have in mind? So there, and you're right, and that's part. But on the other side, and to Karen's point from before, it's excellent. Do we have to choose that kachna means now, and it's wrong to say it means bevakasha, or it's wrong to say it means now and it only means bevakasha? And so, Faith, that was your question. But kachna ein na elosh lashon bakasha. Rashi didn't say it. Rishon ben Abba said it in the Gemara, right? But why did he say it so categorically? So much hangs in the balance now, because this is the great battle, and the great warrior, right? What's he warring against? He's warring against his Yetzer Hara. He's warring against the forces that don't believe in, the people that don't believe in God. I mean, warring is not sword, but right. And this is going to be the great. If Avram will do this, it shows that he's willing to even. His willingness to listen to God will override his desire to live by the promises of Hashem and see them fulfilled. It's even the seeming undermining of that promise will still leave him unshaken, which is quite something. So we only have a few minutes left now. Debbie, was that okay? That I do it justice? Yeah. Okay.
Perfect.
Unpacking what you were saying, but okay. So now look with me at the next Rashi. And it's really quite something, because to me, at least, it gives lie to the idea that the only purpose of having Yishmael in the story is to show that he is unchosen and he's wicked, etc., and that Avram Avinu on some level hated him. All of that, to me, at least looking at Rashi, again, also quoting from the world of Chazal, quoting from the Madrash, tells us that Avram Avinu stayed with his love for his son Yishmael, and that there was something redemptive about Yishmael. Law of conservation of character that I learned from my Rabbi. When you'll get to the end of Chayei Sarah, where Avram Avinu passes away, it'll say that Yishmael will also be there at the burial, right? And the idea that Yishmael was not going to be part of the covenant, but that he is on some level a Baal Tshuva. He's on some level connected still to Hashem, to Avram's legacy, that it wasn't, right? That even if he's not a Ben Brit, he's not part of the covenant, but it's not binary, right? It's not everybody's either bathed in light or they're sunken in darkness. There is a middle ground. And that middle ground is not to say that they're equal, an equal footing in terms of the connection to the covenant with Hashem, but it also doesn't mean that it's like a discard pile and there's nothing to do with anything anymore. Au contraire. So, kachna et bincha et yechidcha asher ahavta et Yitzchak. Why didn't God just say kachna et Yitzchak? Yishmael's not in the house anymore. Seems fairly obvious. So, kachna et bincha et yechidcha asher ahavta. There's step after step. Rashi, we won't have time to see anybody else today, but Rashi, There's, according to Rashi, again, based on the Medrash, there is already, to Karen's point forward, there's already a dialogue. There's already a back and forth. It's not the dialogue of challenge, but it is the dialogue of clarification. Et bincha, Amar lo, says Rashi, Avram answered, Shnei banim yeshli, I have 2 sons. Amar lo et yichidcha, take your only son. Amar lo ze achid limo, ze achid limo. This one is an only child to his mother. This one's an only child to his mother. Amar lo, God said to Mr. Ahavta, the one that you love. What did Avram Avinu answer? Amar lo, shnehem ani ohev. I love both of my sons. Amar lo, he said to him, et Yitzchak. No, I mean Yitzchak. So, Hashem knows everything. Hashem knows already the future, obvious. But Hashem also knows how to be very specific. Wouldn't it have saved time, energy, space, etc., in the Sefer Torah to just say, Vayomer, Kachna et Yitzchak, V'lecha Eretz Amoria. Would have been so clear. Chalak, smooth. Instead, they had a roundabout, this son, that son. So Rashi tells us, based on the Medrash, excuse me. This is actually from the Gemara. It's the next lines of the Gemara. The lama lo gila lo mitchila. Why didn't he tell him from the very beginning? Why didn't he tell him right away? He didn't want it to be too much of a shock to the system. So he broke it to him gently. So challenging, no? First he told him, your son. Well, which son? Well, that seems more shocking to me. Right? He built it up. Strange. But I'm curious, and I saw your comment there, Shali. I'm not ignoring it, but I am ignoring it only because it's going to be its own shiur. It's a whole shiur about that. Where is Sarah Imenu? Why is she not in this part of the story? In the Medrash, by the way, she is in the story, very much in the story. But in a level of pshat, it's like she's not in this. Why not? Where is she here? A very, very preliminary answer, which is going to be totally unsatisfying. If this mitzvah had come to Avram and Sarah, don't you think it would be obvious it would be only Yitzchak from the very beginning? And for Sarah Imenu, does she have a great love for Yishmael? Leading question, right? But Avraham, who's all about chesed and ahava and avat Hashem and avat abriot, right? So Hashem tells him, your son, your only son, who you love. And in each case, we find out that there's like an oscillation for Avram Avinu saying, my son, but I have 2 sons. He hadn't written off Yishmael, your only son. But I have 2 sons who are the only son to their mother. Didn't deny the reality of Hagar and Yishmael. By the by, again, in Rashi's iteration, not the Pshat, Rashi's iteration, based on a whole line of thinking in Chazal, when Sarah Imenu dies, who does Avram Avinu remarry? Keturah, whose other name is Hagar. Why? Et bincha, et yichidcha, asher ahavta. I love both of my sons. The one who is, if you will, to put it in very contemporary terms, the one who's on the derech, and I love the one who's not on the derech. The one who's religious, the one who's some other thing. I love him. It's also my child. Once you told me Yitzchak, now I don't have a choice. Okay, now I know which one it is. But Avram did not discount the possibility that his relationship with Yishmael didn't end just because Yishmael was out of the house. It so happens Hashem was clarifying for him, no, it is Yitzchak that I want you to have this covenant with, and this is a covenantal moment. Something grand is happening here. Grand, I mean, something, awe-inspiring, but also filled with dread and awe. Yeah? And that's happening here. That's something. But there's a dialogue. And in the way Rashi, based on the Gemara and Sanhedrin, sees it, is that there's a back and forth. Vayomer Avraham, Vayomer Avraham, Vayomer Hineni, Vayomer Kachna et Bincha, but I have 2 sons. Et Yichidcha, but I have 2 only sons. Asher Hafta, but I love both my sons. Et Yitzchak. So if you read it, sort of the Rashi reading is that when the Pshat started with, and I say to him, and Hashem says to him, Avraham, and Avraham answers Hineni, so then there's a dialogue. It's not just that Hashem spoke and Avraham, yeah? Now, we're still up with the questions, but there's no banter or negotiation. And maybe that's this is what's going to be. It's another question. We won't get there today. But just on those words, you see that there's a process of interaction. And I am left with the question a little bit. I'm asking you the question. what does it mean? He didn't want to tell him right away because it would really be a shock to the system. So he edged him into it. But the way that he edged him into it was not, I mean, he was asking me, but I have something to tell you. It's something very serious. It's something very important. It's something that will shock you. And here's what I have to say. That's not what happened. He told him, Kachna et bincha et yichidcha asher ahavta. The question, the clarification process was of the person, who it's going to be, and what it's going to be came after. So it's a question. Okay, I feel like there are a bunch of people who are waiting. Karen, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, for me, those steps just ratchet up the tension. If it was me and that, it would be like watching a car accident starting. It's like, no, not that one, not that one, not that.
That's what happened. That's what happened.
One.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I would not personally, I'm not Abraham, obviously. I would not have been comforted through that or calmed in any way through that process. I would just be, the heart would be
more unnerved.
faster. More unnerved,
not less.
Yeah.
Chinami. It's a question. I'm still turning it. I've been turning over my mind for a long time. I still don't have really a great answer. If you come up with something, if anyone comes up with something, please share, because I'm interested. Someone else had a comment, I feel like. Shelly, you want to say something else about the thing with the business with the fact that Sarah is not mentioned? I guess that's a no. Okay, we could leave it for next time, I guess, for discussion. But just a takeaway certainly is the idea that the concept that somehow it was binary, and that even though Sarah Imenu is vindicated by Hashem himself, saying, he's going to be taken out of the story because he cannot be in this story anymore. It's just not going to work. Didn't mean that Avram Avinu was now no longer thinking about his son Ishmael, or that he thought that maybe his son Ishmael was no longer going to be part of his story. On the contrary, he thought it really was, right? And the idea that there could still be, and I do read something of this a little bit in the, for what it's worth, in terms of the Rosh Hashanah reading, that even though this day, the second day of Rosh Hashanah, we read this story, is very much about the covenant between Hashem and Avram Avinu, about the Nisayon, about all this, that in Avram Avinu's mind, even though the first day was the day about Yishmael, Yishmael's still in the story here. He's still in Avram Avinu's mind and his thought and his heart, right? And Hashem tells him, it's actually not going to be, him. So there's a lot to say here. I'm going to leave it here so that next week we can see maybe some of the commentaries on the Gemara. You'll see if you like any of those approaches to understanding what does it mean. Hashem didn't want to tell him suddenly because Shemati Tarev Daito, lest it unhinge him mentally. So he broke them slowly. By the way, and it keeps going. The Medrash says that to endear him more and more to the mitzvah, to give him more reward for each and every clause, each and every piece. We'll have to see what that is more next time.
One last
Helen, last comment. Then we got to let everyone go.
Okay. Okay. The Malachim come, and Sarah is told of her pregnancy to be. Now, isn't all of this seen on the stage about Sarah's knowledge and announcement from the Malachim to her and her part in her future child? And why is she not notified, consulted at this very moment about the future of the child really that was promised to her as well?
I leave your question, which is along the lines of Shelley's question, as our hanging question for consideration, because it's a glaring omission, isn't it? She's in the prakim before, and as we know, she's in the parak after in chapter 23. Her name features rather prominently. Why was she left out of
And
the
her-
story here? In some
Right,
way?
and her laughter, her acceptance of it.
We don't hear any of that here.
credulous.
Why not?
Right.
Why not? Yeah.
And suddenly she doesn't have anything to say about this.
Yeah. So in the Medrash, first of
She-
all, in the Medrash, she does have what to say, or she would have had what to say, perhaps. And we'll see that is actually something that Chazal themselves are cognizant of and perhaps wrestling with. And we'll have to come back to it because we're out of time for today. But thank you for that. So 2 orders of business for next time. One, to
Wait,
understand better
as
what
far
is
as
Rashi
I'm
mean. He didn't want to tell him
concerned-
directly. And number 2, well, we won't even get next time to what Sarah is. That's gonna be a holdover for a few weeks still. So come back again. We'll learn again soon.
Okay.
Ad Con for today.